Old soldiers never die, they just fade away, a quote by Douglas MacArthur. In today's episode of Tech Fair 2015, the life and legacy of the heroic MacArthurs are remembered. From the efforts in the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, such dynamic leadership can be depicted. Historians Syed and Rogers have dedicated their lives to preserving the history we have of the MacArthurs. Let's turn to these historians.
Let's begin with Massachusetts-born Arthur MacArthur Jr. Simultaneous with the outbreak of the Civil War, Arthur enlisted in the Army at the age of 16. He took advantage of the opportunity to escape the lifestyle planned out before him by his own father.
Arthur's son, Douglas MacArthur, followed his footsteps as he was born and raised on multiple Army bases throughout the United States, stating, "It was here I learned to ride and shoot, even before I could read or write. Indeed, almost before I could walk or talk."
At such a young age, entering the Civil War, Arthur was often scrutinized for his lack of the ideal physique. He was very skinny and light-weighted, and seemed as if he could do no work. However, after much dedication and the drive to pursue in his military efforts, he rose above many others. The Civil War erupted on April 12, 1861, over the conflicts between the free and slave states. Arthur seized the regimental flag from the fallen color-bearer and led his men up Missionary Ridge near Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Civil War ended on April 9, 1865. Roughly 620,000 American soldiers died, leaving many others wounded. He later achieved a Congressional Medal of Honor. Arthur was promoted to major and assigned to the Adjunct's General Office. He later fulfilled his duties in the Spanish-American War, which broke out in 1898. Shortly after, in 1900, a great number of soldiers were sent to the Philippines in hopes of protecting its citizens from Japanese aggression. Arthur was appointed military governor of the Philippines. However, such a personal glory could only last so long. In 1909, when he retired after being passed over for the Army's top job, Chief of Staff, he returned to the States. For the rest of his life, he would harbor bitter resentment towards the man who urged his demotion, William Howard Taft.
Most certainly, the MacArthurs did not take this lightly. How did his youngest son, Douglas, redeem his family's name?
Douglas was born on January 26, 1880 in Little Rock, Arkansas. MacArthur graduated at the top of his class from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He became a pivotal aide to his father while serving in the Philippines.
Let's go back in history to witness his contributions.
Preceding the United States' entrance into World War I in 1917, MacArthur helped lead the 42nd Rainbow Division in France and was promoted to Brigadier General. As the division's first major action, they were shipped over to France. In a trench raid, MacArthur, with the Rainbow Division, greatly assisted in the recapturing of several German prisoners. For this, he was rewarded with the Croix de Guerre. For this raid, and a number of other raids, MacArthur was promoted to Brigadier General. The Rainbow Division would later defend against the German Champagne-Marne offensive. For these events, MacArthur received 4 Silver Stars, a St. Croix de Guerre, and was made a Commandeur of the Légion d'Honneur. In his later time of command during World War I, he received a variety of decorations, including 3 additional Silver Stars for a total of 7, 2 Wounded Chevrons, and 3 Distinguished Service Crosses.
His military contributions only continued to progress.
Indeed, he was an important figure in World War II. Again, let's turn back in time.
As expansionist Japan posed an increasing threat, Douglas MacArthur was demanded to active duty and named commander of the U.S. Army forces in the Far East. On December 8, 1941, his air force was destroyed in a surprise attack by the Japanese, who soon invaded the Philippines. MacArthur's forces retreated to the Bataan Peninsula, where survival was indeed a challenge. In March 1942, on orders from President Franklin D. Roosevelt, MacArthur, his family, and members of his staff escaped to Australia. MacArthur promised, "I shall return." Shortly after, U.S. Philippine forces fell into Japan in 1942. Shortly after, he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his defense of the Philippines. In the meantime, Douglas and his forces went island hopping in the Pacific. In 1944, he returned to liberate the Philippines. That very year in December, he was promoted to the rank of General of the Army, as well as given command of all Army forces in the Pacific. Success was sought when on December 2, 1945, MacArthur officially accepted Japan's surrender above the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The demobilization of Japan's military forces, as well as the restoration of the economy, will demonstrate a triumphant closure to the war.
However, after all of this, he did not stop.
Douglas was not only in World War I and II, but also in the Korean War.
On June 25th, 1950, the Korean War began, when about 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army crossed the 38th parallel, the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and the pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south. Since the beginning of the 20th century, Korea had been part of the Japanese Empire, and after World War II, it fell to the Americans and the Soviets to decide what should be done with their enemies' imperial possessions. The North Korean invasion came as an alarming surprise to American officials. As far as they were concerned, this was not simply a border dispute between two unstable dictatorships on the other side of the globe. Instead, May feared it was the first step in a communist campaign to take over the world. The North Korean army was well-disciplined, well-trained, and well-equipped. Rhee's forces, by contrast, were frightened, confused, and seemed inclined to flee the battlefield at any provocation. By the end of the summer, President Truman and General Douglas MacArthur, the commander in charge of the Asian theater, had decided on a new set of war aims. But as American troops crossed the boundary and headed north toward the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and Communist China, the Chinese started to worry about protecting themselves from what they called armed aggression against Chinese territory. Chinese leader Mao Zedong sent troops to North Korea and warned the United States to keep away from the Yalu boundary unless it wanted full-scale war. After being declined of the request to bomb the Republic of China, Douglas MacArthur held resentment, similar to that of his father's.
Douglas MacArthur faded away from the military world like a hero. He simply did not want to translate his aggression further than it already had been between him and President Truman. However, his contributions to our nation's history will be remembered forever. That's it for this evening's episode of Tech Fair 2015. Have a good evening.
His military contributions only continued to progress.
Indeed. He was
I wasn't ready! His military contributions only continued to progress. His military contributions only continued to progress.
Indeed. He was why did I say it like that?
His military contributions only continued to progress.
Indeed. He was an important figure.
I didn't even laugh! I couldn't do anything!
Wait till.
Maddie fucked up.
What are you doing?
I don't know, I'm trying to open
Fix it.